something we wonder about too with about Jesus. It's so important to our faith that he walked and lived,
Pitched his tent among us.
pitched his tent among us, that which we have touched with our hands, which we have seen, which we passed on to you. But then we also think it's really important that he ascended. Kind of his absence is somehow important. Unless I go, I cannot send the Spirit. Things like that. And when who is it? Mary of Magdala at the tomb. Don't hold on to. So interesting. As if there's like a possibility of a deeper relationship opened in absence. After presence.
Right. I mean, Catholics do believe that he is still with us bodily.
Bodily, sacramental.
Bodily and sacramentally.
Yeah. But that sacramental presence in the Eucharist, as profound as it is still an anticipation of him actually coming again in his own appearance, rather than sub his figuris.
Yeah, not hidden under bread and wine. The outward signs are going to be matched to the in reality, which is this is a person, right? Yeah. Huh. Yeah, I guess I find in my personal experience, friendship needs physical proximity to grow after a period of physical proximity. I think it can certainly continue to grow. Like you say, if you have someone that you get on the phone with them and you talk for 3 hours. I have friends like that. But it started with that very human connection, face to face, person to person.
Yes.
Father James and I remain very good friends, even though he's hours away now. And we'll get on the phone and talk about history for 3 hours,
That's awesome.
Which is always a good time. Oh,
yeah, that's true for a lot of my long distance friends too. That we're not so much, most of the time, we're not so much talking about what happens in our lives, but we're talking about Kierkegaard or
about the realm of ideas.
Yeah, Plato or Homer or whatever it is.
Mostly, is it mostly literature?
With Finbar, it tends to be politics. And recently, because we're all a little drunk on politics.
That's wild. Just pull your microphone a little closer.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Are we live?
Sit up.
I turned it on.
Oh, sweet. Perfect.
But
yeah. No, fantastic. Oh, a little drunk on politics. Oh, I know the feeling well. Oh. What are your thoughts on what happened in November?
Yeah. In many ways, it felt like the same energy as 2016 to me.
Okay.
Where it seemed to me it was very easy to become, at that time in my life anyway, the way I was thinking about national politics, it was easy to become jaded with the system. That Democrats, Republicans, they have some important differences, but they're all so embedded in the machine that what they have in common so profoundly outweighs their disagreements that you're sort of not left with too much of a choice. And we tend to vote. I voted Republican because they're more pro-life, but Republicans had done very little with the pro-life cause, even though they continued to say pro-life things. for so long, and it just easy. I'm reading about the Greek polis where election day in Athens or the assembly in Athens opens with the cry, anyone who has a word of wisdom that the people need to hear, step forward and be heard in the assembly and be judged. And you're, as opposed to disappearing into a little anonymous ballot box
Mm.
and casting a vote amid millions, hardly feel like you count somehow.
Mhm.
But what seemed to happen, what my feeling of 2016, where I actually didn't vote for either major candidate at that time. I was a little bit scared of Trump,
Mm.
and I didn't. He wasn't a personage on my radar until the first Republican primary debate.
Oh.
And you might remember that debate stage. There was Rubio, and there was Cruz, and there was Ben Carson, and there was Carly Fiorina, and there was who's the guy from New
Jeb Bush.
Jersey? Jeb
Oh,
Bush
oh,
was
sorry. Yeah,
not Jeb
yeah.
Bush. Or was
Chris Christie.
Chris Christie, Jeb Bush. There were so many people on that stage, and then there was this giant, strange, obnoxious person who I thought, who is this jokester? This uh, and I couldn't see voting for him at that time, and I voted for the Solidarity Party candidate, which is a very small Catholic party. But when he won, waking up to him having won, I sort of felt like the floodgates had opened, that anything now could happen, that the country, that democracy still existed, and that the people who were dissatisfied with the current state of the regime had a voice, and they could. I just sort of thought, well, I'm excited. I just felt hope and excitement, and a little bit scared, thinking, let's hold on to something and see what's coming. And as his first term went on, I was more and more impressed that not only that the crazy things that he's capable of saying, uh, he governs more wisely than some of the things it sounded like he was going to do.
Mm.
But also that his capacity for making chaos, in part by saying wild things that cause the ears of those who hear it to stand up, to use an Old Testament phrase, actually makes the way for substantive changes. And so even his negotiating tactics with foreign leaders and foreign enemies, he knows how to keep them guessing and make them a little bit scared and not announce beforehand what his negotiating plan is going to be, which is the very worst thing you should do when you enter a deal. He's so there. It seems like he's carrying a mantle of some kind, and initially, around him in 2016, there was this kind of phrase: he's taken up the mantle of anger, the mantle of discontent, and part of that discontent had to do with our engagement in foreign wars, that some of them perhaps we were right to get involved in, and some of them perhaps we were wrong to get involved in, but we didn't have the self-belief, the confidence, and the will to actually execute them, and we didn't have the rational strategy to put down achievable objectives and focus our efforts towards those objectives. What it led to was this kind of apologetic posture to the world and a kind of defeated posture to ourselves. So we were going around saying to the world, we've been involving ourselves. We ask forgiveness for maintaining the world order, while actually becoming less and less capable of projecting power out into the world for the sake of justice and
And stability.
and stability and peace worldwide. And so that was part of the anger, and part of the anger had to do with the outsourcing of so much of our industry and our labor. And part of the anger had to do with had to do, and this has only increased, has to do with the wide open border, in which it's not just about, you know, people are coming here and taking my job. Not just about that. It's about criminals, terrorists, gangs, human trafficking, fentanyl, flooding over the border, and all those things have only gotten worse. And so there, and the political class, political establishment, was either encouraging these problems or simply doing nothing about them. But I think the way I see it now, there's a real opportunity for, because that's a kind of a negative thing, the mantle of anger. There's a real opportunity for a kind of more, especially this second term, I feel there's this opportunity for a more positive kind of mantle. You know, there's the kind of people around Trump right now. They're like a wildly diverse, in the true sense of the world, true sense of the word, a group of talents and perspectives. But JD Vance is so intelligent, articulate, and capable of arguing in real time.
He strikes me as a very good presence on any debate stage, any interview, any time that he has to articulate his position or the position of the administration. He seems overly qualified for the spokesman position.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on Elon Musk being involved in an unofficial capacity with the administration?
Well, Elon is you you have to just say he's amazing, and that he represents talent, creativity, daring, major entrepreneurial risk taking with amazing payoffs. And of course, one of the reasons why people like Donald Trump is because he's a businessman. Elon Musk is a businessman. It's almost like too much of an understatement to put it that way. He's like a business king. He's I mean, Trump was a little bit like that too, isn't he? I know his own weird energy and glamour with the casinos and the so many wives and so on. And of course, Elon has so many children as well. He's pro birth, pro natalist,
Pro population.
pro population. Yeah,
He doesn't see humanity as a curse upon the planet, which is a bit of a pet theory among members of this administration's opposition. They really think that the human species is akin to a plague.
Yeah, and I think this idea of desiring to create big things, to do big things, goes right along with the kind of deep natural pro-life instinct of I want to be a father. This generosity means a kind of fullness that wants to generate. And even though Trump's positions aren't pro-life enough for me, his energy is in fact pro-life. And and same with Elon. I mean, his positions again are they're not. I mean, he will speak about and both. I mean, both Trump and Elon will speak about the horrors involved in abortion in a kind of straightforward way that many people, even who are very much more correctly pro-life in their positions, will not. But this, you know, been reading the Old Testament a lot with my students, and one of the first promises to Abraham is, I will make you a great nation. And what he means is your children will outnumber the stars of heaven and the sands of the sea. And when you hear Trump saying we want to make America great again, there's an echo of that basic natural biblical and God blessed desire to fill the earth and subdue it and multiply and be a great nation. And I really feel there's, I guess I'm trying to find my way to what I think of as the positive energy of Trump, because I mean, another part of his big part of his appeal is that he's so unscripted. He's willing to say the things that are politically incorrect, but either what many people are thinking or in many cases what is obviously true. And this is one of the great things about his acceptance speech. There are a lot, or maybe I have like 5 favorite moments from his victory speech, and one of them was, where we've created a real historic realignment from people of all the major American races. Black men voted for him, and a majority Hispanics are moving in that direction. So a major realignment around common sense.
Yeah.
Where, it's insulting to be made to repeat lies and swallow lies. And unless you repeat these lies and swallow these lies and nod your head when these lies are uttered, you won't have high position. Your job might be threatened. This is like, I guess I'm talking about things like a man can be a woman, this sort of thing. This is a Soviet technique that's designed for breaking people's self-respect and their will. If you can get someone to lie about something they know right down to their marrow is obviously true, then you can control them. And
because you've gotten them to corral themselves. You can give them the script of your choosing because you've already gotten them to rehearse the script to themselves again and again. Maybe this guy can actually bear children. Maybe this guy belongs on a sports team with a bunch of other girls. Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's right. That's right. Do we know what the types of things the Soviets were teaching people to say as opposed to?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of examples here. You had to say that
no one was starving in the Ukraine.
Right, yeah, that the economy was booming, or that Stalin never makes mistakes. Certainly, you couldn't say anything slightly insulting about him. Yeah.
Something interesting about Trump is that he loves it when people make fun of him. Like no other person has really embraced humor like he has. Like he'll share memes about himself. You know, like and he'll make jokes about what's going on and like he'll come out to a rally in a garbage truck because the day before they called him garbage. And I think that that's something I've always noticed with people that give you a weird edge are usually people that can't smile very well.
Mm.
And
Can't laugh at themselves.
they can't laugh at themselves, don't really find humor in many things. It seems like the most trustworthy people are just they can make jokes about themselves, the funniest little things, and kind of I don't know why that is, but
Mm.
it seems to make Trump a very likable person because he seems like if you didn't know he's a billionaire, you think he's just a grandpa of a bunch of really cool kids.
Mhm. Yeah. And I guess it's not that he doesn't, it's not that he connects really well with the working class.
Yeah.
And it's not that he pretends to be one of them exactly. Even when he's putting on a
The McDonald's apron.
McDonald's apron or the garbage man outfit, it's that it's a joke in a way, but it's a joke where he's connecting himself. He's see it comes off very fake when Kamala says, I worked at McDonald's and so on, this kind of thing. Like I can buy a bag of Doritos, like it's so. But when he's doing it, it's like a grand sort of theater, and he's
Yeah.
somehow connecting without he's making himself part of this life without claiming to be something he's not. Somehow the humor makes that possible. Um, the common touch.
Yeah, I mean, he like even took the McDonald's one step further. Like after he won the election, I don't know if you saw this, but he sent a letter to the head of McDonald's saying he needs to resign his position at McDonald's because he just got hired to be the president. Like
Hilarious.
it's great. Like but yeah. I wonder if it's because like maybe his work ethic,
Huh?
because people respect how hard he actually goes, and so they know that in a way he works harder than they do.
Yeah. And he's been involved in these big building projects and
Yeah.
building the Trump Tower, building the ice skating rink in New York that no one in New York City could do, this kind of thing. And in all of these moments, he's organizing a lot of people, and these projects they become his life while he's in them. And anyone who's doing any small job within that project knows that he's with them, even
Yeah.
if he's not doing those things. So there's a
He's not laying tile, but he really cares
yeah,
about the way you're laying your tile.
yeah. And the work ethic is part of it too. All of his energy is poured into making this thing happen and figuring out with you it will take to make it grand and the best thing ever.
The best thing ever. Install those
Yeah.
those golden toilet seats.
Which is, I mean, this is
Yeah.
kind of a common point with Elon too. I think that you know,
Elon will move onto the floor of one of his factories
yeah,
and sleep there so that he can work 20 hours a day. Right. So yes, he is the world's richest man. He is a billionaire. But and yes, he delegates, but he also works really hard.
mm-hmm.
That's hard to ignore,
Mm-hmm.
that he's willing to sleep at his workstation during one of his surges.
Mm-hmm.
We need a surge.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Well, and of course, there are how many of these kind of rallying points for conservatives? Overturn Roe versus Wade, cut down the size of the federal government, get immigration under control, um,
Trade deals.
trade deals. I mean, but these are things that we've been saying we want forever and not doing anything about. And Trump came into office and he got Roe v. Wade overturned. And though he didn't repeal Obamacare, he repealed the individual mandate, which wasn't to some extent the most obnoxious part of Obamacare. And
He did try like 4 times to repeal Obamacare. Yeah.
started actually did get the border under control, didn't finish the wall, but started it. And now with Elon and Vivek, looks like he's going to make some of those conservative dreams come true in terms of cutting down the size of the bureaucracy.
Yeah.
I don't know. We'll see what happens. What they've promised in the Wall Street Journal or what they as their goals are amazing. We'll see whether they actually will manage to abolish the Department of Education.
Mm.
So
Is that the explicit goal? I've heard it both ways.
that's what's one of the things they say they want to do. Yeah. What have you heard to the contrary?
I thought I had heard a rumor that they had selected a cabinet member. Was it McMahon?
Mhm.
Vince McMahon's wife? Is it Linda? I thought I had heard a rumor that they were going to put her as head of the Department of Education. I hope I'm not getting my
That
facts
sounds
mixed up.
right.
So I was sort of curious, okay, if you put someone at the head of something, how often do you say, all right, dismantle it from underneath you? Maybe. I
But
mean,
it might be that if you're dismantling it, there are parts of it that you want to
right.
keep and absorb into other places or something.
Sure.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that is
Certainly
something.
education.
A little bit about the education. That's something Trump's mentioned. Is he said we're like averaging 50th in the world now for like student overall grades and things. Pretty bad. And Trump says it's time to become #1 again.
Hmm.
And he thinks one of the ways to do that is make sure it's more localized competition. Because he said it used to be like in schools, you're always competing against other schools. Who's going to be the best? They said with the Department of Education, you're all given the same thing, and there's no real incentive of who's going to learn better, who's going to have better systems of learning, and all these things. So, what were you going to say, Jonathan? Though.
I just was going to generally concur that it's a commonplace that American students are graduating high school without an eighth grade reading level. They're graduating college without a 10th grade reading level by the standards of, say, the 90s or by the standards of uh, other Western countries like Finland or Norway, France, Spain. I mean, I will say, and this is very, very much the evidence of personal experience, but typically when you meet people from other countries, a very common experience for Americans is to walk away from those interactions thinking that person really knows a lot. Um, but I mean, that's not hard, fast evidence, but it is certainly an experience that many Americans have to think, wow, that person seems kind of brainy, even though they're not an academic, say. Yeah. What do you think the administration slash the Republican Party will have to do to transition into that post-Trump world, right? He's not going to have a third term. So, in a weird way, both parties are in this position simultaneously of having to think we're 4 years away from having to have a really new brand in front of the electorate, right? The Republicans have to think about it and the Democrats have to think about it. I don't know to what extent they know they need to think about it. I just don't know. Maybe they do. What are your thoughts there? They have to transition away from the personality of Donald Trump.
The Republicans do, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's a big question about whether, there's this the historic realignment that Trump is talking about. Um, can whether the standard can be passed to another bearer and it will work. Um, Trump is has a unique charisma, and so can someone hold together the the elements that he has brought together to produce these kinds of victories? I mean, the Democrats had a similar problem, I think, after Obama, because Obama was an energizing, for whatever reason, he was an energizing and exciting president. I still think there was something cool about him, and he was an excellent speaker. Um, it was also very exciting for people that he was the first African American president. Though to me, that side of him is a little strange, because I don't know. Trump seems like a black man's white man, but um, sorry, but Obama seems like a white man's black man. He doesn't. he doesn't.
He's not actually black.
He doesn't seem. He doesn't. He gives off the vibes more of the Harvard elite than than you think, like the kind of deep Black culture vibes of this country to me. But he was exciting for that reason too. And after Obama followed by Trump, I sort of thought maybe American people will only ever vote for the most interesting candidate, like whoever that happens to be. That's going to be what they.
Right. We don't know what flavor we want, but we don't want vanilla.
Right. But
Anything but that.
So obviously with such an interesting cabinet, I'm very excited about the prospect of JD Vance doing something. If he can ride the wave, that would be wonderful. I think a lot of people for a while were looking towards DeSantis. DeSantis has done amazing things in Florida and has kind of transformed a swing state into deep red country.
Very red.
And he both has sound conservative ideas and values, but also is a little bit of a nerd too. So he knows how to make things work. But I think he really damaged himself by running against Trump in the primary. I think to me it was a contradictory move, because he's one of the ships that rose on the Trump tide, and you cannot fight the tide that lifted you. If you do, it just makes no sense.
It'll swamp you.
Yeah. So it made much more sense for someone like Nikki Haley to run against Trump, even though she wasn't going to win, than it did for DeSantis.
Yeah, DeSantis did sort of blow his wad. I wonder, but on the other hand, he has an excellent record as governor, in the sense that most people who live in Florida are happy that he's been governor, which is a pretty good test, not the only test.
Yeah.
Right, but this is interesting. We're 4 years away from a post-Trump world. There's going to be more room for people who are not as closely aligned with him than there is in the present political moment. And so in a way, it's going to be more of an open field here in 4 years. But in the same breath, I have to say, Trump has brought, to my way of thinking, at least 2 or 3 people within the foyer of the presidency, right? Vivek, Vance is the obvious one. Tulsi Gabbard, I would say, but that seems a bit more of a stretch. RFK, I don't think could ever really have a shot at it. Not really. Um, so on the other hand, yeah, someone like DeSantis could have another go because Trump presumably will have a reduced role after his second term. He'll also be 82. So I'm very curious to see if he personally feels that he's done his duty and actually wants to retire to Mar-a-Lago, really be away from Washington for the remainder of his years. It's all very interesting questions to my mind.
What's the future for Trump is a great question.
It's a great question. Yeah.
Because he has the highest winning for endorsements of any person.
Mm.
I think 98% of the people he endorses wins.
Mm-hmm.
But he kind of
Right.
like brought the Republican Party out of the ashes. Like,
Right.
kind of like said, these are the people you want to think about, and started getting. He's almost like the anti George Soros, you know? Like he was like, okay, put in these governors, put in these reps, figure these people out for your judges, and then everyone started thinking more of a much conservative manner. Like he seems. I don't know. I think we were talking to Dr. Virginia about this, how the conservatives have never been together really.
Mm-hmm.
They have always had tugs and pulls,
Between neocons, yeah, and natcons, yeah.
I think Trump's been the most conservative unifying force we've had.
And some people will argue he's not really a conservative at all, of course. But yeah, I always think the deepest, most fundamental division, although I don't know how Trump enters into this mess, but historically in the Conservative Party is between something like um, classical liberalism, the conservatism of that looks back to Locke, uh, and a kind of, I don't know what to call this, a kind of more traditional religious conservatism that reaches back before the American founding, but has to do with um, is really like some kind of afterlife of uh, the medieval synthesis, which can't ever um, be fully suppressed. And I don't think Trump really knows what he is. I think he is the kind of person who senses, like, with a kind of intuitive way, energy fields and pulses and the pulse of the nation, and knows the difference between what is strong and what isn't strong, and what has life in it and what doesn't have life in it, and knows somehow how to connect with it all. And so that the energies that have lifted him are to some extent larger things than he fully understands. Which is again why I like this language of a mantle. That there's something, the some of the evangelicals like anointing. Um, there's something there's something about a man who once again can speak the language of his people, and in whom the people see themselves embodied, and in a form they can recognize, and in a form that they can affirm and take pride in. And so in that way, I think he's a kind of a kingly figure, and in a way that presidency hasn't seen since, I don't know, there's Kennedy as a possibility, FDR, Lincoln, Washington, maybe Andrew Jackson, that sort of, maybe Teddy Roosevelt had some of this too, but something larger and something that in which the kind of the self-understanding of the country and different parts of its symbolic language can come back to life.
A political muse in a way, right? I am the instrument or the vessel of something beyond me.
Mm. Mm.
Well, yeah, Trump's even spoken like that. Now he's like, I'm only here because God wants me here.
So this is another moment from his victory speech that I loved when he said, many people have said that at the rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, God spared me. And I think God spared me to do this job. And I'm going to give every ounce of my being to doing this job well. So this sense of I mean, it reminds me of George Washington's in the French Indian War, his first encounter with battle. And he said, I heard the bullets whistling, and by God, there is something nerving in the sound, or something like that. Do you know the phrase? Something like that. That is, I loved this moment because it seems like from within the Republican Party, from within the deep state, from within the Biden Justice Department, from within the FBI, they have been trying to assassinate Trump from day zero. And now the bullets are literally flying. And he can say what he's been saying all along: fight, fight, fight.
Mm.
This is your America. This is my America. It doesn't belong to these shadowy, behind the scenes actors who knows who sent up that sniper? Was it no one still knows. And whether his Secret Service or elements in his Secret Service were complicit, no one knows. No one ever likely will know. But the sense that there is this shadow conspiracy that wants his blood, and and then there's this man out in the open who's the representative of the people, who isn't gonna back down, which is also, to me, the Elon taking over Twitter was a huge thing, because Twitter did the, to me, almost treasonous thing of deplatforming our primary representative while he was still president, depriving him, and he was the Twitter president, right? That's how he connected with the people. It's crazy,
right? It was the instrument of his common touch.
Yeah.
Right. Right. It
You
was.
hear what he was thinking at 3 a.m. or immediately, like when someone speaks at the Oscars, you get Trump's comment right there. He's talking about the thing with you, throwing popcorn at the TV with you, or whatever it is.
Yeah, it was sort of a modern day fireside chat, a la FDR, right? This is one of the things that FDR did so well that made people think that he was such a strong advocate for them, is because he seemed to have time for you. And Trump definitely comes across as having time for you. That may be his superpower. Right. That even Obama lacked that. Right? He could certainly. I do not find Obama's rhetorical style appealing. However, the proof is in the pudding. What does it matter what I think if in his campaign he was able to draw out more of the electorate? He was able to put a energy and a zest and a fire into his rallies, right? If a candidate is able to do that, there's no point in quibbling if it matches your personal taste. So Obama did it in a way during his campaigns, but then Trump did it the same thing in a different way
Mhm.
over his social media. People felt like they were on his wavelength,
Mhm. Mhm.
and they were.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And another thing, this whole business of sort of apologizing to the world that kind of had certainly had infected the Democratic Party, but also had sort of, I think after Afghanistan and Iraq, sort of infected everyone. Um, Trump admits we need to do things differently in a lot of ways, but think about it. I mean, the next phase of that infection is something like the 1619 project, which in which the whole of the American story is rewritten as a uh, contaminated racist project from the very beginning, and that all of our icons of greatness, all of our heroes are, we've been just
We must
like
topple every statue.
we've burned the statue Robert E. Lee, and we've torn down Stonewall Jackson. They all have to go. All these patriarchs, all these heroes have something unacceptable about them. And one thing, when Trump says, we're going to love our country, we're going to love our heroes, we're going to celebrate them, um, it's also that he himself has something unacceptable about him that makes it all the more believable. Like if you're staying within the lanes of politically correct and saying, and yet I like Columbus and we should honor him, it doesn't mean the same things. If you're saying, I'm like Andrew Jackson,
Right.
I don't care for your pleasantries and your niceties, and actually a lot of your greatest men, they didn't either, and we should love them. We don't love them because they're not saints. They're not, in every case, in most cases, in every respect, moral exemplars. Neither is Trump. Um, and as a Catholic, I can say neither is our Pope. But
Mm.
that doesn't mean that he isn't
That he doesn't
the
wear the
vessel
mantle.
of authority and grace and power, and isn't to be honored for it. He wears the mantle.
He wears the mantle. And someone needs to wear the mantle. And the mantle is not a useless instrument. I I really enjoy That Hideous Strength by C.S. Lewis because it seems that he foresaw some of the attitudes that we are dealing with now 60 years later. He wrote that in the early 60s. Does that sound right, Adam?
That sounds about right.
And he talks about on one side a group of people who see humanity as a disease upon the planet and all organic life as something that really should be castrated and then sanitized and then eventually eliminated, right? Castration, sanitization, elimination, right? The admiration for the cold face of the moon without it, without human breath, without animal life, without organic presence. And I think are seeing whispers, not even whispers now, outright endorsement of some of these ideas in parts of the press, right? How can we possibly bring children into this burning, overcrowded world? How can we possibly allow other nations to have as many children as nature would bestow? We have to bring in our instruments of castration. So you start to see these things in the real world that I don't know that Lewis could have described without having some gift of foresight in his novel. But it is interesting that you talk about fatherhood and generation because, again, that's such a powerful theme in the novel. Not fatherhood, yes, but also motherhood, also just the creative power of man and woman. And in a way, you start to see the opposition that was crystallized in this election. It was crystallized, but in the background were these two opposing forces, right? The generative power of human life versus the program of castration, sanitization, and eventually elimination.
Yeah. And, I think JD Vance called it when he said Kamala supporters are cat ladies. The one demographic that shifted in the leftward direction in this election was college educated women. Every other demographic more or less moved rightward. And this this is also connected to the way in which the protest against the election, one of the ideas that gained traction very quickly in a day or two after the election was women angry about the results, saying we're not going to
have sex with men.
We're going to be celibate for foreseeable future, whatever. Which people compared it to Lysistrata, the great Greek comedy, where the men have been engaged in this dark spiral of the Peloponnesian War, which is a war that is only going to get worse, and away from these women have given up their husbands and they're giving up their young sons, and now the women of Sparta and the women of Athens get together and say we're going to deny our husbands sex and make ourselves beautiful. And eventually they'll come back to us and we'll tell them, you can't enjoy the good things of domestic life unless you put aside this silly, pointless, destructive war. But you can see what's going on there with Lysistrata is that she's organizing the women politically for the sake of asserting the value of the family and the household and the common good of the city. Whereas these women were saying, what were they striking in the name of, I don't want any threat to my world of free love and infanticide. And if the price of that is living in autonomous isolation, where love and desire cannot touch me, I will accept it. So this is not the autonomy of the free citizen or the lady of the house, as Lysistrata and her gals were asserting, but the autonomy of the witch and the devil. And yeah, it's so I think JD Vance called it with cat lady, and amazingly Pope Francis said something a week or two after that. He was in Indonesia and he was praising the Indonesians for their large families, and he said, this might strike you as funny, but in my part of the world, in the Western world, people prefer to have cats and dogs rather than children.
Whoa.
And so, there's I do think that's and of course at the Democratic National Convention, there was a van outside of the committee, the convention, where you could kill your unborn child and where you could get a vasectomy. And, while the Democrats were rallying, there were murders going on right outdoors and people sterilizing themselves. Um,
Strange rituals indeed
yeah.
for a political rally. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it seems like the Democratic Party needs a reset in the worst way.
but in a sense, this is the disease that has overtaken Europe.
Ah,
Europe is so bought into the notion that the highest moral act is reducing your carbon
footprint.
and their they feel guilt over the history of Western dominance, and so they open. I mean, there's some backlash on about this, but I think it might be too late. They open their societies entirely to
Refugees from other nations.
Islamic nations and so on, and it's sort of like the loss of a will to live,
Mm-hmm.
and a kind of pursuing with something like a moral or religious zeal, your own decline, because your existence is the sin. And of course, the whole narrative about whole DEI narrative centers around this, that all all the civilizational structures that we've created, and all of our successes have injustice at their root, and we can't dismantle them enough to atone for our existence. And they say as whites, and I don't think of myself as white. I think of myself as American and as Lithuanian and as a Mayflower descendant and the descendant of the English and the Irish and the Scottish and so on. I think when I think of my people, those are the peoples I think of, and even more than when I think of my people or my ethnicity, I think of the English language itself, of which uh, which Wordsworth said so gloriously: "We must be free or die, who speak the tongue that Shakespeare spoke. Faith and morals hold that Milton held." Those are
That's your heritage.
that's where my people comes from, and anyone who loves and respects and speaks the English language is my brother in some real way, much more quickly than someone who happens to have the same skin color to me. Nevertheless, the whole DEI thing centers this around whiteness, and that whiteness needs to dismantle itself, decolonize itself, and destroy itself, and so on. And it is a kind of religion of self-destruction and a kind of
We need to have a self-flagellation as atonement for the sins of our race, right? I suppose a symptom of that would be these dinners in which people get together and confess to their whiteness, confess to their racism. It does have it backpacks on the same wiring that we have for religious instinct, right? There's been a wrong, there's been sin. They're not going to call it. There needs to be a public admission of sin and a public remission for the harm done, right? It in a certain way, it really makes a lot of religious sense. The way that worshiping an idol makes a lot of religious sense. It's pretty natural for us to do it.
Yeah.
But the object of it is wrong.
Yes, you have to be um you can't create or destroy cultures or civilizations without religious fervor. But it makes a great deal of difference the character of your religion
Hmm.
and what your religion ultimately is worshiping. And there is a side of paganism, side of the pre-Christian that rough around the edges, bloodstained though it be, is about rejoicing in and affirming and furthering life and trying to move a human being towards its higher possibilities and finding out what those are and moving towards them. That's the, I mean, it's the Greek religion is like this, for instance. But they're also, and I think that side of kind of natural pagan humanity will always be among us and finds expression in figures like Elon Musk, for instance. I think he has some of that in him. Which he's like Zeus. He wants to have lots of children, father of gods and men. But or Heracles, But they're in post-Christian religion. There, and this was a point that T.S. Eliot liked to make, and others have made with him, that society that turns from Christianity tends to move toward some kind of worship of death. And it might be that, Christianity offers the good news. You are loved. You are redeemed. The greatest whom the world cannot contain has shed his blood to save you. It gives you the good news. And because it gives you the good news and so fully, it also gives you the bad news. The bad news that you need to hear in order to understand how good the good news is, and the bad news that you're capable of hearing when you know the good news is coming.
And that bad
You
news is
are a sinner,
ah,
and you have broken something that, however much you want to put it together, however hard you try, you never can. And all of your efforts without a rescuer are nothing and less than nothing. And if you can forget, you can stop believing in the good news. In fact, it often requires effort to believe in the good news. Though faith is a gift, but it also is a virtue that is built through effort. And so if you have difficulty believing, you're not alone. But once you can cease to believe in the good news and still remember the bad news, because the bad news is so familiar and there's so much evidence of it. you societies, and this is actually one thing that sets Western society apart, Western culture apart among the cultures of the world. Most cultures say, let's find a stable system in which we maintain something that's worth maintaining in a kind of a cycle.
The circle of life.
Yeah. And once we figure out that cycle, we codify it into rules. People stay within their lanes. And the sin means breaking the balance. But Western culture is founded on a figure of the hero and of the philosopher. And these are individuals who challenge the established order, who reach higher, break the boundaries, open up new things, question what has been received in the case of the philosopher. And where, in the face of vanity of vanities, all things are vanities, that everything is headed towards death, where does that energy come from to affirm life and its future and its possibilities and where it could still go, where it might go? It's really special. And you might get it because God spoke to you out of a burning bush and says, I have a plan for you and your children, and I am with you, as the Israelites did.
They were willing to leave behind this sense of
where did Western civilization get it from? God didn't speak to them from a bush. And our European civilization comes from the union of that. God saying to this people, I don't want you to be enslaved to the gods of these nations and their endless cycles in which you serve them and serve their system and so on. I want to do something never seen before with you.
I want you for myself.
For myself.
Not for this system, which just is life on repeat for endless generations.
And then on the other hand, you have the Greeks. And these two things come together and they form our European civilization. And so if our European civilization, of which America is the furthest frontier of, right? This is a civilization that isn't content in stable forms, but breaks generation after generation, breaks out to start something new. And our latest exodus, our latest adventure is this American thing. And that's why in Europe, that's why we still have the faith, still have the fire, and still have a mantle to confer upon Donald Trump, where Europe has forgotten the good news and has forgotten the heroic spirit and is simply involved in remembering its sins. It's caught in the bad news. You get the bad news in its strongest form along with the good news. But if you forget the good news, you'll still have the bad news. And all you can do at that point is inefficacious acts of atonement that are ultimately self-destruction and an embrace of death. And that is the specter that is haunting Europe.
Haunting Europe. If I, being aware of my own sins, think that I'm worthy to continue forward, it would appear to them to be a sort of they could even defend it as idolatry of self. How can I continue forward?
That's right. And as a Christian, we say, I with my sins, I would never say I could continue forward, except that my Lord and Savior takes me by the hand and says, I say that you will continue forward.
I say, come follow me.
If you see the sins and you don't see the Savior.
Right. If there's no Savior to follow, what's the point of moving forward?
And of course, you know,
The only right, you can't move forward. You would actually have to turn around and embrace the death that you do realize is following you.
yes,
Right? There's actually there's a half truth there that death is always at our heels. So if there's no savior to follow, we might as well turn around and walk towards the death, both in our personal lives, with killing ourselves early, in our family life by not having children, in our national life
yeah.
by ceasing to thrive.
It's actually a great moment in Paradise Lost after the fall, when Adam and Eve coming to terms with what they have done, what they have broken, and what their future life will be. And Adam says, maybe it's Eve says, the best thing we can do is spare our children this existence to which we are doomed, which we would be dooming them to, and we should simply not have children. And of course, as they repent, receives the mercy of God, this idea is set aside, and they return to the original, be fruitful and multiply. But it actually, Milton portrays it as a kind of noble thought, a noble self-sacrificial thought that they have in the wrong and error, but nevertheless, Adam thinks, maybe I should kill him too. That might be the best thing I can do. But yeah. Well, and I just also wanted to say, it's traditional in medieval Europe to think of, and this is somewhat alien to our American perspectives, but it's traditional to think of the king as a necessary and special image of God among us. This is true of the priests, and of course it's true of everyone. But the one who wields temporal power for the sake of the common good fills a sacred role. And I guess I think there's something like that in Trump. That he knows himself somehow to be spared by God and to be anointed and wearing the mantle, and he loves America. You see him hugging an American flag. People don't do that unless they love the country. His love might be misguided in many different ways, but he looked around and he said, someone needs to really lead this country and make it great again. And he hesitated a lot, and then he said, I'm going down the elevator and I'm gonna throw my hat in the ring, and I'm going to face the hate, and I'm going to face the love, and I'm going to go on this adventure that has no other purpose than to realize the potential of this great nation that's being wasted. And so
Don't blow it.
I think
that's his message to that's his founding idea. Don't blow this.
yeah.
This is our last chance to not blow it. Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. As much as people criticized him for some of the semi-apocalyptic language, the last election ever, and so forth. Right. Fair enough to criticize him because there will probably be more elections. But what he's getting at is don't waste the opportunity. And this might be one of our last opportunities if we keep squandering them.
And for me, it's the virus that has Europe,
The virus that has Europe.
that has the Democrat Party. If we succumb to it, and our educational system is corrupted by it. Especially our higher educational system is enslaved to it. So many of our churches are corrupted by it, or at least can't challenge it with any courage.
Mm-hmm.
We have our other Schumachers, but they're rare.
It's true.
So someone needed to defy the system and to just be the kind of conduit of the deeper energies, the energies of like the life of the people and what people really care about, and the kind of spiritual power that's behind it that I wouldn't claim that Donald Trump understands, but that he nevertheless, I believe, is the carrier of.
Has an instinctual reverence for something he doesn't quite comprehend, rather than the swamp fraying the mantle.
Yeah, it's like something mentions like the energy of like America. I didn't realize this, but the other day I learned from I don't know if you follow Patrick Bet David. Pretty cool conservative guy.
PBD. He's fun.
Yeah. He
Good,
was
Hebrew name.
He's Lebanese?
Assyrian.
Assyrian. Okay.
But yeah, he immigrated in high school and then became a veteran and big businessman. He's a very big voice for conservatives now. But he was saying that America is only 4% of the world's population. If you break it down, he says, yet we do more than almost every other country combined. Like Texas alone, if it was its own country, is the 10th largest economy in the world. And it's like, it's incredible when you look at how much energy America has and look how much stuff we have going against us, and we're still doing really well. So, yeah, there is something about us that's so unique. And
But what could we do if we eliminated some of those burdens and inefficiencies?
honestly, yeah, like what could we actually be? We're a tough stock. I mean, we came across the ocean, we had to build it all, fight multiple wars, have a civil war, come through that, be kind of like the safeguard against communism and Nazism across the world.
As Churchill said, the new world shall come to the aid of the old.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
In World War II, because in our brash, artless, many ways artless way, we are the carriers of the fire of Western civilization, and that
Even with our cheese-shaped headwear at Packers games and our hot dog eating contests and our huge loud cars, all of that, there's a fecundity there that can't be found in the galleries of the Louvre.
today, yeah.
I do love the Louvre. I want to keep going on this, but let's take a quick break. Genuine person on your own team, that wasn't the way to go to bat, right? And frankly, I did feel that way about the 2020 debates. Was he needed to come across to a certain part of the electorate as calmer. He instead used it as a bit of a rally instead of a debate. And again, I support his policies, but I think you can still say handle the ball a little differently in that different context of a debate. Oh. Are we back on?
Mhm.
Oh, sweet.
Can I ask just what time it is?
What time is it? It's 9:25. Yeah. Yeah. Adam, sounds like you did a talk about the end of the Odyssey, and I've been wanting to pick your brain about it a little bit. Last time you were here, we talked about the Iliad, and especially about that end of the Iliad. Those famous scenes between Achilles and Hector, and then Achilles and Priam. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts on a very different set of ending scenes in a very different story. What is going on at the end of the Odyssey, particularly between Odysseus and Penelope, and between Odysseus and his own nation?
Yeah. Well, you could say the whole course of the Odyssey about a man recovering his identity, who he is, beginning on the island of Calypso, where he's unmanned and dejected. In a sense, he has everything most men desire: the beautiful enchantress whom he shares a bed. But as Homer puts it, he lies beside her, an unwilling man beside a willing woman. And every night he goes out to the coast of his little island prison. He weeps while he looks over the barren waters, because he's losing what it means to be him.
Which is agency?
Part of it is agency, right? Because he's a contender, he's a hero, he's a striver, a warrior. And then his particular heroic signature has to do with thinking 3 or 4 steps past what anyone else around him is thinking. And so somehow not only winning, but controlling the game and creating the game that he's winning. So he's a man of agency on a kind of hyper level. So that's part of it. But it turns out that just as big part of it, and actually in the end, a greater part of it, has to do with his place in the cosmos, which is secured for him by his household, his island, his father, his
Laertes?
and his wife. And it's these realities that give him to himself as who he is in a way that transcends his own capacity to control or to act, so that they kind of guard and bestow his uninvented being, so that when he on Calypso's island, it's for Penelope and for Ithaca and for his son growing old that he's really longing. He is also immediately happy to be back in the world where he exercises agency. And you see this, kind of see it phases on the departure from Calypso's island, where he's given tools and he builds a little raft, which is actually more like a little ship. It's so well built. And when you're making, you're suddenly engaged with the world in a kind of productive way. But you have all the time in the world, all the time you need once the job to finish the job, and the job maybe itself patterns time until it's made. But then when you get out onto that boat, and you're steering under the stars. And at this moment, when Odysseus does get off the island and he's riding out on the boat that he himself made, it says, and God like Odysseus, pulling the sails under the stars, steering his course through the world. Suddenly you get the sense, here I am. For the first time in 9 years since his captivity by the nymph goddess. And and then the storm comes, and now he's wrestling with the waves, and his ship is being shattered, and he's struggling with the elements, and he's a man in battle again, and all his powers are called upon, and just to survive. And then he finds himself on the shore of Scheria, and Homer gives a simile. It was like when an old man has his family all around him, and they're all afraid he's about to die, and suddenly the life is back in him. So that's what it was like when Odysseus reached the shores of the island and he kissed the ground. So this is a man coming back from a kind of nowhere world in which he's nobody.
He is Nemo
He's
on
he's
Calypso's
pampered,
island.
and he's over. Yeah, he is Nemo. Yeah.
But he has nothing to contend with.
Nothing to contend with.
And nothing to contend for.
And yes, nothing to contend for. And he's too well taken care of and satiated and so forth. It's a world without time and without struggle and without.
It could be compared to what a young man might do if he never leaves the house.
Yeah. For you think you're playing video games, and you're getting level by level by level, but at a certain point, like, it's actually the video games that are playing you, and you're kind of in this days like realm where there is no time, and you're being amused and strung along, but you're not really being challenged, and you're not finding out anything about yourself. Or when Calypso says, well, don't you know that I'm more beautiful than Penelope, and she can't compete with me in stature, and I'm a goddess, and I can make you immortal, and that when you go out into the world, you're going to face storms and trials and suffering. And Odysseus says, yeah, I know how beautiful you are, Calypso, but I like Penelope. And if the waves come and strike at me and buffet me hither and thither, let this adventure fall.
I like Penelope.
He doesn't try to name her qualities or like make a list of like, these are all the reasons why she's good. No. She's my wife. I belong to her. I can't put a quantity or a name on that. But and yeah, it's tough out there, but I was born for adventure.
It's interesting that he walks away from her other promise of eternal life, right? He leaves the tent. He leaves the tent in which he was protected from the ravages of age, and he leaves that willingly. It is interesting that a man would be willing to do that. You might think, I'm on Calypso's island. This is it. I've made it. I'll live forever, completely happy.
Yeah.
But he's not.
Yeah, I have the corona, and I have the girl in the bikini.
Right, in the tropical paradise.
Sure. But yeah, that's right. But the immortality that is proper to man is not unending succession of pleasure, but rather imperishable glory.
Imperishable glory.
Which, as Achilles has shown us, is not achieved by avoiding the terms of mortality,
Hmm.
but found in accepting those terms. And the choice of Odysseus is similar here to the choice of Achilles. For all the contrast between them, he chooses a short life that will be distinct and distinctly his life, will carry his name, rather than a kind of anonymous everyman's paradise in which could go on forever.
Hmm.
He's like, "This is great, Calypso. I really like it, but I gotta finish the epic."
Yeah, certainly exactly, and certainly he did like initially, um, but it didn't like it forever. And Homer says this very beautiful terseness. He says, "The nymph was no longer pleasing to
Ah.
him," implying that yes, she was pleasing to him for a while, but somehow not satisfying his deepest desires and his deepest urges and his
The pleasures that we take that still have that germ of regret underneath them. Yeah. Right. Man, it was fun to play video games for 6 hours, but afterwards,
uh,
man, it was a lot of fun, but man, I want something more for myself.
yeah. And even though maybe he has this eternal life in some sense, it says that as he weeps looking over the barren waters, he felt the sweet lifetime draining out of him, meaning that not really living.
Hmm.
Um,
Because you're almost like in the same day over and over again. It's not like you have a new day to look forward to.
Right. Right. It's Groundhog's Day
Yeah.
for the ancient Greeks. Yeah. Which is interesting that that motif survives and we keep coming back to it. What do we do if we're stuck in the loop?
That's true. And Bill Murray, of course, is in a sense faced with this same choice.
Yeah.
He can find a way to create a paradise of pleasure out of the repeated day.
Sure.
But it becomes empty to him, so empty to him that he begins to try to kill himself to escape.
Yes.
And
Yes.
only after he's kind of plunged down into the emptiness of it is he willing to say, well, what can you really do in a day?
Yes.
If only a day is given to you. Let's find out. And of course, and this leads to him choosing his life for the first time, and choosing and finding a way to live generously.
Right. There's that great scene in which he rushes to make sure he's on time to catch the kid falling out of the tree. Because that's very interesting because you could say, well, if I'm going to live this day over and over and over again, what's the point of catching the kid falling out of the tree? Tomorrow, the same thing's going to happen. I could catch him tomorrow. So the fact that he's catching the kid falling out of the tree, in a way, is like living as if there may not be a tomorrow. Maybe I won't wake up tomorrow morning, so maybe I have to catch this kid.
That's so interesting. Yeah,
Today.
this is some of the Stoics thought that the world actually does go in an endless cycle, so that every action that you perform is performed an infinite number of times. And you can see how there's two ways of receiving this teaching. Like that seems to, does that empty my every action of significance? I've done it an infinite number of times in the past. I'll do it an infinite number, or is it actually that's what fills it with infinite significance? So interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
If this is your permanent record, if this is what you etch on the universe, this is what you've etched on the universe, right? Backbiting someone who just walked out of the room, that's what you've decided to put into the universe for an infinite repetition. How horrible.
Yeah. Well, and of course we like to say, and I totally endorse this maxim that don't don't do anything that you wouldn't be happy dying doing. You know, and I remember when I used to commute down the kind of giant highways in Texas between Dallas and Arlington, and you see like so many wrecks along the way. And I think, well, I'm driving to teach to pass on the Latin language.
Yes,
If I die on the highway, that's fine.
I'll die. I'll have died in the service of something good. Help me understand the scene that we find when we get back to Ithaca with Odysseus. Penelope has been tolerating these suitors for a long time. Some might say entertaining in the sense that the wealth of her own house has been spent on these suitors, right? There's the goat herd who Odysseus accuses of, you've driven in my own goats to serve these these ne'er-do-wells. Why is Penelope putting up with this crowd of young men?
Yeah. So Penelope has a very interesting dilemma. She longs for the return of Odysseus, but Odysseus, as is said in the early books of the Odyssey, has disappeared, as no man has disappeared. Many men went to go fight at Troy, and many died and were buried gloriously, and some men perished on their return. But Odysseus has simply fallen off the map, and no one knows what has become of him. So she doesn't know, nor do her people know, that whether Odysseus is alive or not, whether she is a widow or not. So on the one hand, she keeps alive the hope of his return. On the other hand, her household is not, has no head. And as long as there's hope that Odysseus will return, she can sort of rule in his stead. But if it seems as if it's hard to understand how this works exactly, but it seems as if she can't she, on the one hand, she has to prepare for the possibility that he will not come. So there's that. And if he's not coming home, then she needs to, just by custom, she needs to marry so that
The ruling house has someone at the head of it.
right. And it seems as if Telemachus until she marries. So it seems as though if there's an unmarried lady in a household like that, the customs are that she has to entertain suitors. Though she also does have to prepare for the possibility that she might need to marry, because she simply doesn't know what's become of Odysseus.
There's no definitive word.
Yeah. So she's in a kind of dilemma. And even when Odysseus comes as the beggar and speaks with her, she describes this dilemma to her, that she longs for her husband, and she thinks she will never be happy in her home as she was when he was there, and that she shrinks at the thought of entering the bed of an inferior man. But that as long as she doesn't marry, she has to entertain these suitors, and they are enjoying the situation for their own reasons. There's feasting off of Odysseus's swine and drinking his wine and lusting after his wife while sleeping with her handmaidens. And so they are there because the custom of courtship says that you can go and bring gifts to a noble lady's house and let her get to know who you are, and so that she can make her choice according to her judgment of having seen who you are and according to the rhythms of her heart. That this is a cultural form that does honor to the lady and honor to her choice. But they're sort of in the place where they're kind of manipulating that form for their own ulterior motives.
They've got a bit of a Calypso's Island existence of their own.
Such that actually this form that's supposed to honor the lady actually becomes a kind of long extended insult to her.
Yes.
But Telemachus would really like to see her get married. At least that's what Penelope concludes, because he can't until she's married and taken into the house of some other lord. His house is filled with these suitors who run things for the most part, and he isn't allowed to enter into his own majority. And so Odysseus himself made Penelope promise that when Telemachus was bearded and ready to be master in his own house, that she would marry and give the house over to him. So in a sense, another reason why she needs to entertain suitors is to be faithful to her husband's will and command.
Ah.
So it's a very painful situation for her.
Right. Filled with tension, and there's no obvious way that picking one of them and marrying or kicking them all out, neither of those are really the best answer. And so she has to chart this painful middle course. Once again, the painful middle way.
Yeah.
We were just talking about this last week.
At a certain point, she thinks it will probably be the best choice to choose the least bad of the suitors. It should probably be this fellow named Amphinomus, as my guess. So I don't claim to
Know the mind
know
of
the depth
Lady Penelope.
But she wants to delay it for as long as she can, because she doesn't know that Odysseus has died. And she loves him. And he's her husband. And she doesn't want to depart from this, as she says it, this house where I was happy as a girl, as a bride. I was happy as a bride. I think even in my dreams, I will never forget it, she said. Which, of course, she would leave the house into the house of her new husband if he were to depart. Yeah.
How long was it that she had all the suitors there? Do they know?
It's either 6 or 4 years, I think. So it's not the full 9 years. It's not the full. It's certainly not the full 20 years. As long as Odysseus was at Troy, um, they had some sense that he was alive. And then
Right. Word would have been brought back if he had died in the war. Right. It was still the campaign, the current campaign of the Ithacan army. Right. So there would have been connection with whatever was going on there. But then the war is over and he is just gone.
Man, I mean, 4 to 6 years is a long time to have a bunch of losers hanging around.
Yeah. Yeah. It's it's just such a difficult position for her. She knows she's up against this timer of her son needing to shave. Right.
Yeah.
Right. So she knows that there's this backstop. She knows that given the dangers of the world, he's probably gone. But there's this fierce hopefulness. Remember a classmate of mine when we were freshmen, someone was asking him about the suitors. He said, "Oh, Penelope's hedging her bets."
Mhm.
It seems a bit more of a cynical take.
Well, it's very interesting. Athena appears to in various guises in the course of the Odyssey, and she appears early in the Odyssey, both to um, Penelope and Telemachus, and she says to both of them, she gives them some sort of hope that Odysseus might be alive, but then she also instructs them to prepare for the other possibility. And so it's it seems like this is true of Odysseus too, because throughout the Odyssey, Athena is there to help him, but she never, till he reaches Ithaca, she doesn't reveal herself to him that she's helping him. She wants him to be burdened with the dilemma and to struggle with practical possibilities to the extent that he can read them as far as he can, and to think about the best possibility and to think about the less good possibility, to think about plan A and plan B, and to be caught in that intense human drama of not knowing which future you're preparing for. How do you both prepare your heart to welcome your husband while thinking about what's the best future for me and for my son if I never see him again?
Have to take another.
And the kind of depth of strength of character that's required to live in these unbearable evils is part of what Athena wants to see in mortals.
The goddess of wisdom does want to see people bear up under the cross or the burden, at least, of difficult circumstances.
And very interestingly, when Odysseus he first sees Penelope, he's wearing his disguise as a beggar. So she doesn't know who he is. And he awakens in her memory the image of what he was like when he departed. And because he pretends to be someone to whom Odysseus came as a guest as he was leaving Ithaca for Troy, and he can describe Odysseus's brooch, and he can describe the clothes that Odysseus was wearing that no doubt Penelope herself clothed him in, and tells her what he was like. And when she remembers him, he sees her melt with love and grief before him. And Homer wonderfully says, she wept for her man who sat beside her, setting his eyes like horn. So she's weeping for him, and he's sitting right next to her. So there's something really amazing happens in this moment where he's with her at a moment that he shouldn't be able to be with her. He's with her in his own absence. And
he gets to see her not pretending.
Yeah.
And he knows that she's not pretending.
He knows that she's not pretending. And so you also, it's very strange series of scenes, and you think there's a moment where Euryclea, the nurse, is washing his feet, and she recognizes the
Scar from the boar.
Boar when he was hunting us, and that was connected with his name. And it says that Penelope turned toward the darker side of the room because Athena turned her away, so she didn't see the recognition. But you get the sense in this scene that Penelope is telling, she actually tells the beggar all of her dilemma and how she weeps through the night, not knowing what to do about her son and about the suitors and about her husband. And she asks him, what should I do? And she stays up night weeping like the nightingale for her young, and so on. And Odysseus, and this beggar tells her, I heard word out there as I was traveling that Odysseus is coming. He's on his way. He's coming home. And she says, travelers are always saying that. I think he will never come home. It's almost as if it seems like she wants it to be true so badly that she won't let herself believe that it might be true, because that would be too great of a disappointment. But then she sort of says, look, I've had this dream. And she tells this dream that seems completely made up.
Sure.
I saw these 12 geese, and they were eating all of the things, and they were kind of like the suitors. And then suddenly this eagle came down out of the sky and attacked them and tore them to shreds in front of me, all my geese. And then he flew up into the sky and he said, this eagle, who have been this eagle attacking the geese, am your husband Odysseus, returned home from the war. And she's like, what does this dream mean? I don't know what this dream could possibly mean. And Odysseus the beggar says, lady, this dream can only sustain one meaning. Odysseus himself has told you what it means. And then she says, I don't know, but some dreams come from the gate of ivory, and they're false dreams. Some dreams come from the gate of horn, and they're true dreams, and how can a mortal know? But I'm going to propose a contest in the hall tomorrow. Bring forth Odysseus's bow, and if any man can string it and drive the arrow through all 12 axe heads, I will marry him and forsake my home. And Odysseus, the beggar, says, this is the best plan. And what's crazy is that it seems as though Penelope doesn't know that the beggar is Odysseus. But it also seems like they together have plotted the necessary step that Odysseus needs, the necessary element that Odysseus needs in order to take back control of his household. Because the contest of the bow enables Odysseus to be in the hall with all the suitors, none of them armed, and him with the bow in his hand, and begin the slaughter and the purge of his house. And he sets the rest of the trap, taking the armor out of the hall and locking the doors and preparing for the doors to be shut on them and so forth. But it's Penelope that puts the sting in the trap by setting the bow and arrow in his hand. And
putting herself as the bait.
Putting herself as the bait, yes. And what makes this even wilder is that after this interview in the night, Penelope has this very moving and strange speech where she compares herself to some of the women of myths of old who in their sorrow prayed that Artemis would strike them down with her arrows, and were carried to the place where the ocean wraps back around. And she says, I wish that Artemis would strike me with a death like that, so that even in the underworld, I could see my beloved Odysseus again. And even now, I dreamed that he was standing over my bed, and it seemed not like a dream, but a waking vision. And then she cries out, and Odysseus, who's sleeping out in the hall, hears her cry out, and Homer says, it seemed to him that Penelope was standing beside him and was already reunited with him. So something very strange has transpired where Odysseus and Penelope are somehow reunited beneath the disguise. And Odysseus's cloaked presence by Penelope's side has purified her longing for him into this intense desire where her longing for him becomes mixed with the longing for death itself. And nevertheless, and the fact that they're together and they're not together, he's with her in her absence, in his own absence, and they're actually, she somehow subconsciously recognizes him, and they're able to plot with each other without amazing, like it just shows some kind of really deep and profound
Mental rhythm.
Yeah, that sort of proves their marriage in a way that you couldn't have proved unless Odysseus had maintained this disguise.
If he had sailed triumphant into the harbor and
Right.
just walked off the boat and back to his throne.
Yeah.
There's a way in which the terrible tension that Penelope has had to bear, Odysseus is coming, even in the hidden form that he has, does allow her to move forward. Even though, yes, he's back, but he's not back with either of the clear possibilities, right? He's not back as the king, but neither is he bringing her news of his own death or something like that. He's, in a weird way, able to provide a clarity of forward motion, even though the two options she's been thinking about all these years isn't what he presents. That's very interesting.
And it's also that he doesn't just come in and claim his rights as husband.
Yes.
He approaches her as the humble guest and the beggar who's telling stories and who's honoring her, so that she's been pursued by these entitled men for so long, who, it's almost as if instead of by coming to her as beggar rather than as lord and husband, he becomes the true suitor or something like that, the one who's probing her heart and listening to what she has to say and listening to her troubles and interested to find out who she has been and who she is. And
it amounts to a second suit of his own. One thing I'm struck by reading it again after all these years, but even when I read it as a young college student, is Odysseus purges his house, yes, but he also purges Ithaca of, call it, the best and the brightest, right? They're even described that way in the book, right? He's ridding it of its best young men. How is he, as king of Ithaca, able to do this? Shouldn't he have shown some measure of mercy after taking out, how do you pronounce his name? Antinous? I don't know how to pronounce it. The sort of leader of the suitors. Antinous. Okay.
Eurymachus then makes a kind of plea.
Yes. I found that interesting. Please, we'll give you gifts. We'll apologize. We'll apologize publicly. Just let some of us go.
Yeah.
And Odysseus says, no. You're all here. You're all staying here. I guess I wonder, how is this not a bit of a betrayal of the health of his nation?
Mm.
Are all these young noblemen wastes of skin?
Well, it seems to me that the sort of fundamental social civic institutions established by the god, protected by Zeus, hospitality, courtship, and the marriage and the household itself, they're designed to lift human nature from a place of necessity into its higher possibilities. And you can see this hospitality again and again in the Odyssey. You come to me in need, and I know that you're a potential threat. Hospitality teaches me to recognize you as a potential blessing as well. And before I challenge you and ask you your name and make you give an account of yourself as like the full defensive attitude would do, first I bathe you and I clothe you, and then I put food before you, and then I welcome you into the life of the community. And in this kind of warm situation, then I say, now tell me who you are and your story. And what comes of this is that the stranger is approached in such a way that, in a kind of inquisitive, curious, and welcoming mode, where what he is and what he may be can emerge in the fullest possible way and in the best possible light, and the future of our relationship can take on its best possible forms, hopefully. We simply take this occasion to find out who and what each other are. We treat that as something worth doing. And because we do that, then we're opened up to the possibilities of who we and what we might be for and to each other. And so guest friendship is like the friendship of the not yet friends that makes the forging of new relationships possible. And the value of those new relationships is impossible to calculate in advance, but they can be hugely valuable even in material terms, though their value is always recognized as transcending that.
It's anti-tribal.
Yes, it's anti-tribal, and this belongs to the distinctiveness of the Greek spirit.
Yeah, you could compare that to the reception of Beowulf and his party, right?
Yes.
Not that anyone is rude to them, but an accounting is demanded immediately.
Yes, as soon as he arrives on the shore, he's challenged by the Coast Guard.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right.
And so, with hospitality, as well as with courtship, as we sort of mentioned before, they are taking these structures ordained by the gods that enable human life, that are designed to order human life from its lower to its higher possibilities. And they're subverting them and making them serve their own idling appetites for wine, woman, and song. And now this would be less of a bad thing if they were not the best and brightest of their people. But these are the young men who set the tone for the whole culture. And the reason why, and they do it despite the fact that Telemachus says this is an injustice, despite the fact that it is an injustice, and Telemachus in the assembly reveals it as an injustice, and the wisest and oldest men of the community agree, you're taking advantage of those who are weaker than you. And at that point, Antinous and Eurymachus don't explain why it's actually just. They say, yeah, we are the strongest. We'll take it.
We're having a great time.
So it's not only that they take those cultural forms that they're most responsible for protecting and for upholding, they subvert to lower ends. And they treat the household of Odysseus as they do because they're stronger, and the house, and though it's unjust, the weaker have no claim against them. And if they're setting the tone for the whole society, then in Odysseus's absence, then when the true king returns, he needs to wipe the slate.
And you could argue that while Odysseus wasn't there, these elders have explained to these young men that what they're doing is unjust. They've been warned. They've had the opportunity to cease and desist because they have been told. And so, in a way, society has thrown down the gauntlet. They did not cease and desist. And so then the line of Ithaca returns. Yeah. And at that point, it's too late.
And you really do see with the suitors, and this is part of what Odysseus sees as he enters his household as a beggar. He sees a kind of society ruled by intelligent but manipulative and hypocritical and scornful and self-righteous Antinous, who can, with his sophisticated speech, can justify all the abuses they're committing, and all these suitors participating in it together and reinforcing each other in it. So it's a kind of society that whose rational faculty is highly developed, but serves what is base, appetitive, and even rapacious in the human being. And such a society, you have Telemachus making the public voice of,
I am being wronged.
I am being wronged, and the old men of the community saying he is being wronged. And then you have the prophet Theoclymenus warning them, you reason, they cannot be moved by rational persuasion or by divine sign. When reason itself is captivated in this way, the only cure is violence. And I think the violence visited on them is overall proportionate.
Overall,
despite being magnificently bloody,
yes,
and ugly in many of his features. And I also think there are some, not Odysseus himself, so much as Telemachus and the cowherd overstep the line into the disproportionate at certain moments. That's my opinion. But I think it's understandable, and I think Homer portrays them. So it's the cowherd savaging the body, the faithful cowherd, the one who did the difficult thing and was faithful to his master, tried to preserve his master's property, wouldn't kowtow to this usurping band of suitors, even when it would have served his own interest, even when it is greatly detrimental to his, even when he's taking insults from it, that he's faithful to his master and he remembers how his master was good to him like a father. Meanwhile, the goat herd is doing all the opposite things and kicking the swineherd and the herd in their face and insulting them and insulting the memory of Odysseus. And so when they get their hands, these faithful servants who difficultly were faithful in the master's absence, they get their hands on the faithless servant. They tear him up in an ugly, ugly ways. And when Telemachus gets his hand on the serving girls who slept with the suitors while they were courting his mother, he hangs them in a very cruel,
from a ship's cable.
Yeah. And they're kind of
kicking. Yeah, right. Their feet are kicking
like
feebly.
birds. Even though Odysseus says, cut them down with the clean edge of the sword, Telemachus says, no clean death for them when he gets his hands on them. So I think Homer wants this to be unsettling, and he wants us to think maybe they're going too far. But I think he wants wants us to affirm the whole thing as good and just overall. And I think the reason why he does this is justice on this earth is going to be administered by human beings. Human beings that are not only rational but passionate, and human beings whose passions are aroused for things that they rightly love. And so when you're fighting a war, like a civil war that is really intense civil war, not just between people of the same country, but people of the same household, it's going to get ugly. And people are going to step over the line. People that you should never recognize they stepped over the line. But sitting in your living room armchair or your classroom or whatever, you shouldn't just say, look at them, they're bad. You should say, no, these are good people. I admire them. They're doing the difficult thing that needs to be done, and they're doing it imperfectly. And if I'm going to live on this planet, I have to be okay with that.
Yeah.
That's what, if you want anything that looks like justice, it's going to include that. Sorry.
All right.
It is. And interestingly, Odysseus is in large part the restrainer.
Mm.
And for instance, when the nurse comes down, she's rejoicing over the bodies of the suitor. They're all lying like they're in heaps on the floor, like a haul of fish dragged in from the water, flopping there. And Odysseus says, "Nurse, it is not holy to cry and triumph over dead men." So he somehow, in the course of his wanderings, in the course of reflecting on the sack of Troy, understands that even a glorious deed like this has its ugly side that you have to accept, but you shouldn't.
It's not holy.
celebrate.
Yeah.
Mm.
It's not holy to rejoice over the necessary elements of wiping the slate clean.
Mhm.
Right.
Mm.
Perhaps it would have been better if the slate had never been sullied in the first place. Yeah. Wow. It's really powerful stuff. There's so much more I wish I could get to, but we are just out of time once again. So we'll just have to have you back. We didn't get to half the things I wanted to talk about, but if
If you want to drain the swamp,
if you want to drain the swamp, you must you must be willing to tolerate the imperfect.
yeah, and you also have to, this is something Trump said from very early in his career in interviews. You have to be a killer. You want to win, you have to have the killer instinct. You have to fight to win, and you have to know how to take down your enemies. Odysseus has that, and that's part of what makes him the king. And there's something about our political class that's a little bit insulated. Part of the reason they don't know how to get things done is they don't know how to take risks, and they don't know how to put themselves in danger, and they don't know how to take their enemies down.
They've never had to burn the ships.
If you want to retake a civilization that's captured by lies and turned away from life towards death, you need someone who has those virtues.
Right. If you're trying to turn an entire culture around, you have to be willing to strive to win and strive despite the pain, right? Because you're going to be striving against something that really doesn't want you to turn things around.
And the true king, when he returns, he will shoot his arrow through all the axes, and he will shut the doors on those who are parasitically feasting on the good of his people, and he will aim at the next target and strike Antinous through the throat and strike Eurymachus through the chest, and then rain death on his foes.
Yeah.
Powerful stuff. Dr. Adam Cooper, thanks for coming on. Good to have you back. See you soon.